This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the Aware Show. This is a very special edition of our program. I'm Dee Dee Sharp. Glad to have you right there with us. Tonight, it's Book TV on WSRE, PBS for the Gulf Coast, and boy, do we have a show for you. Tonight, we will showcase Kathryn Stockett's New York Times best-selling novel, The Help. Set in the 1960s in Jackson, Mississippi, the book tells the story of three ordinary women who take one extraordinary step. The women are a group of Black domestic maids who band together to tell the sometimes sad and triumphant stories of lives spent toiling for upper-class Southern whites. The Help is both funny and poignant and resonated with millions of readers across the nation. And The Help will even soon be a major motion picture by DreamWorks Productions. Can hardly wait for that. Joining me here in our studio to discuss this intriguing novel are book club members from Readers and Writers, Inc. and West Florida Literary Federation. My guests include Miss Mamie Webb Hickson, Readers and Writers, Inc. Book Club, Dr. Patricia Edmiston, President, West Florida Literary Federation, Joan Henderson, Readers and Writers, Inc. Next, we have Aura Wills, a familiar face here on The Aware Show. She's now with the Readers and Writers, Inc., joining us this evening. We also have Clarissa Mitchell. She's with Readers Writer, Inc., and Jeanette Phillips, also a member of Readers and Writers, Inc. We will also have something special for you. We'll have actors from our Voices Are Many to provide dramatic readings from excerpts from the book. Our actors are Josephine Mayo and Felicia Pearson. We're glad to have them here for you tonight. And certainly last but not least, we want to let you know we are taping this edition of The Aware Show in front of a live studio audience who have been invited here to join in on our panel discussion and even ask questions or give their comments on the book as well. Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Aware Show. We're so glad to have you here. All right, we're going to get things started with you, Mamie, because you are literary works when we think here in Pensacola. Tell us, how did this book resonate with you?
Years ago, the book club read a book by Alice Randall called The Wind Done Gone. It's actually a parody of Gone with the Wind. And it goes into the internal lives of the slaves, because we get to hear what the slaves think. This book resonated with me because it's not a parody, but it goes into the internal lives of the maids. What do the maids think? And it's such a wonderfully written and compassionate book, because I think Kathryn Stockett just plucked these women, Skeeter, Minnie, and Abele, right out of history and put them in this color-divided world that we know of from the 60s in the South, and gives each one of them a story to tell. And that's what resonated with me. It's the book I think I should have written, because I know domestic culture. I know the maid culture. My mother was a maid. And it's just one of the best books I've ever read.
Oh, that's wonderful. Aura, we're going to come to you next, because I want to know from you, of course, what you think was the main reason for the book club, Readers Are Writing, Inc. What did they use to decide that this was going to be their book club, the book for them to read in your book club?
Okay, our former department chair at the University of West Florida, Dr. Mary Lo Evans, suggested that we read it. We were emailing back and forth, and she mentioned to me that she had read it and she wanted to have some Black women's reaction to the book, especially the dialect that some people criticized. And I turned the name of the book into Mamie, who prepares our list of books for the year, and that's how it happened.
And there you have it.
And also, by coincidence, a friend of mine emailed me around that same time, and she recommended the book.
I've been hearing a lot about the book.
Right.
I mean, a lot of people are talking about this. No wonder they're making a motion picture of it. Let's introduce some of our viewers now who are watching the show to the main characters. You mentioned them, Mamie.
Yes.
Tell us who they are. And we'll have our actors do our dramatic reading
yes,
as well.
Okay.
There you go.
Well, I think from the beginning of the book, Catherine Stockett establishes a kind of critique. She critiques the relationships between the maids, well, what I call the help and the helped. The maids and the people for whom they work, and the maids and the children that they're helping to raise. And she does that in the opening 3 paragraphs, and that's what one of our dramatic readers is going to share with us.
We'll go to that dramatic reading right now, and then you can take a look at what you think of the help from the beginning of us introducing you to one of the main characters, Abele.
Mae Mobley was born on an early Sunday morning in August 1960. A church baby, we like to call it. Taking care of white babies, that's what I do, along with all the cooking and the cleaning. I done raised 17 kids in my lifetime. I know how to get them babies to sleep, stop crying, and go in the toilet bowl before their mamas even get out of bed in the morning. But I ain't never seen a baby yell like Mae Mobley Leafold. First day I walk in the door, there she be, red, hot, and hollering with the colic, fighting that bottle like it's a rotten turnip. Miss Leafold, she looked terrified of her own child. She keep on saying, "What am I doing? Why can't I stop it?" It? That was the first hint that something's wrong with this situation. So I took that pink screaming baby in my arms, bounced on my hip to get the gas moving. It didn't take 2 minutes before baby girl stopped her crying and got to smiling up at me like she do. But Miss Leafold, she don't pick up her own baby for the rest of the day. I seen plenty of women get the baby blues after birthing. I reckon maybe that's what it was.
That sets up Abelene's character quite well. She's shown to be this loving, nurturing kind of mother to Mae Mobley, who's one of my favorite characters, while Mae Mobley's maternal mother, her birth mother, is shown to be an uncaring, unloving, detached woman.
Okay. And we also have a little bit more from Abele.
Right. I think we do have something else from Abele to show that part of Abelene's character versus the character of the mother, the birth mother.
Then Miss Leafold grabbed Mae Mobley by the arm, jerk it hard with every word. "Don't you touch this phone again, Mae Mobley," she said. "Abele, how many times do I have to tell you to keep her away from me when I'm on the phone?" "I'm sorry," I say, and I pick up Mae Mobley, try to hug her to me. But she bawling and her face is red and she fighting me. "Come on, baby girl, it's all right. Everything." Mae Mobley make an ugly face at me, and then she tear back and bop. She whacked me right on the ear. Miss Leafold point at the door and yell, "Abele, you both get out." I carry her out of the kitchen. I'm so mad at Miss Leafold, I'm biting my lip. If the fool would just pay her child some attention.
Minnie is our sassy-mouthed character.
Okay.
Whose voice and tone both range from defiant to docile. And so we see her speaking to not only Miss Leafold, but all of the white maids in a very defiant tone sometimes, and as I said, in a very docile tone. So I think this particular excerpt here gives us an overview of her personality, followed by her having a conversation with Miss Celia Foote, and they talk about friendship. They're having chicken together, fried chicken, and they talk about friendship.
Okay, so this is now Minnie, and she's
Right,
the
this is
second
Minnie.
main character.
Right,
Okay.
second main character.
Let's go to that now.
Standing on that white lady's back porch, I tell myself, tuck it in, Minnie. Tuck in whatever might fly out my mouth and tuck in my behind, too. Look like a maid who does what she's told. Truth is, I'm so nervous right now, I'd never back talk again if it meant I get this job. I yank my stockings up from sagging around my feet, the trouble of all fat, short women in the world. Then I rehearse what to say, what to keep to myself. I go ahead and punch the bell. She telling everybody in town I'm stealing. That's why I can't get no work. That witch done turned me into the smart-mouth criminal mind Hines County. Well, she says, taking the breaths, I guess that makes us perfect chicken partners then. And after a minute, she says, you know, I'm lucky to have you as a friend, Minnie. I feel thick, hot disgust rise up in my chest. I lower my paper and just look at her. No, ma'am, we ain't friends. Well, sure we are, she smiles, like she doing me a big favor. No, Miss Celia, we ain't. She blinks at me with her fake eyelashes. Stop it, Minnie. My insides tell me. But I already know I can't. I know by the fist in my hands that I can't hold this in another minute. Is it, she looks down at her chicken, because you colored or because you don't want to be friends with me? So many reasons. You white and me colored just fall somewhere in between. She not smiling at all now. But why? Because when I tell you I'm late on my light bill, I ain't asking you for no money, I say. Oh, Minnie, because you don't even give me the courtesy of telling your husband I'm working here. Because you in this house 24 hours a day driving me insane.
Right, we hear you there. You just heard from Josephine and Felicia, who were two of our actors kind of portraying the scenes of Abele and Minnie, who are two best friends and two of the main characters. They happen to be the help. Now, what I want to do is read some of the descriptive language of Catherine Stockett as we introduce the third main character in the story, Skeeter. I want you to check out this descriptive writing. Very, very, very good. And we'll start with, my own mother is looking at me as if I am completely baffling her mind with my looks, my height, my hair. To say I have frizzy hair is an understatement. It is kinky, more pubic than cranial, and whitish blonde, breaking off easily like hay. My skin is fair, and while some call this creamy, it can look downright deathly when I'm serious, which is all the time. Also, there's a slight bump of cartilage along the top of my nose, but my eyes are cornflower blue like mother's. I'm told that's my best feature. Then it goes on to describe Skeeter as, talking about herself. I was not a cute baby. When I was born, my older brother Carlton looked at me and declared to the hospital room, "It's not a baby, it's a Skeeter." And from there, the name stuck. I was long and leggy and mosquito thin and a record-breaking 25 inches at Baptist Hospital. The name grew even more accurate with my pointy, beak-like nose when I was a child. Mother spent my entire life trying to convince people to call me by my given name, Eugenia. All right, Minnie.
Okay, so we chose this next and last passage.
Mamie, by the way. I knew
Right,
I was
Minnie
going to
is
do
in the
that.
book. That's okay.
Okay.
That's okay. So we chose this last passage because it depicts what I think Stockett is showing us, how the lives and actions of the white women actually color the lives and actions of the black women, no pun intended. So what Josephine is going to read is a section in the book when Abele realizes what's going to happen now if these people, these white women, find out that we're writing a book.
I reckon I know pretty well what would happen if the white ladies found out we was writing about them, telling the truth of what they really like. Women, they ain't like men. A woman ain't gonna beat you with a stick. Miss Hilly wouldn't pull no pistol on me. Miss LaFolt wouldn't come burn my house down. No. White women like to keep their hands clean. They got a shiny little set of tools they use, sharp as witches' fingernails, tidy and laid out neat like the picks on a dentist tray. First thing a white lady gonna do is fire you. Then after a week after you done lost your job, you get this little yellow envelope stuck in your screen door. Paper inside say, notice or eviction. Then it starts to come a little faster. If you got a parking ticket you ain't paid, you're going to jail. If you got a daughter, maybe you go live with her. She tend to a white family of her own. But a few days later, she come home saying, Mama, I just got fired. Least the husband's still working. Least they can feed the baby. Then they fire husband. Just another little sharp tool, shiny and fine. They both pointing at you, crying, wondering why you done it. You can't even remember why.
All right, and there you have it, the introduction of the main characters. Once again, Abele and Minnie, who are the two black maids, and then Skeeter, who is this white, soon-to-be journalist. And we'll find out later in the book how she goes on to make that happen by pulling all these stories together, becoming the help. I want to talk now about who are some of your main characters here with our panelists. Who did you think maybe you identified with the most, or somebody that, you know, just kind of reminds you of maybe who you know even now to some degree? Any of you want to tell me who your favorite character was? Or?
Well, I have two, both Abele and Skeeter, because they're bookish, because they want to be writers, especially Skeeter, and Abele finds that she can actually write and think too. And I always wanted to be that, but I grew up in the 1950s when what black women did if they didn't become maids was steep school. So I admire both Abele and Skeeter.
All right, anybody else? Go ahead, Patricia.
I loved Abele also. She's the woman that I would like to think that I could become.
Oh,
She's wise, she's courageous. She helps to get Minnie her job despite the fact that she could be fired. And she loves children, she's a wonderful teacher. And at the end, of course, like all the women, she finds her voice. The other character I really liked was Celia. I know that her efforts were misdirected, trying to break through the walls that those society ladies erected. In doing that, she showed her mettle and her courage, even though
even though they looked at her like white trash,
absolutely.
basically.
And in many ways, her struggle was not unlike that of the black women.
Right.
And at the end, she saw that truth. And then Minnie, of course, helped her to believe in herself, that she didn't have to be accepted by those other women.
Anybody else want to tell us about one of their favorite characters? Jeanette?
I really like Minnie, and I like Minnie because in spite of everything, she really has a soft heart. She covers it up. She's tough and mean, but underneath it all is a different kind of Minnie. And I also appreciate the fact that she speaks up. And I think that's a side of us that some of us are not able to display, but we like it when somebody else has the courage, if you want to use that word, to do so.
It's kind of ironic, too, because she was, in the book, this mean and hateful person to some degree, but then you can see why maybe some of that was going on. I mean, she was physically abused by her husband.
And speaking of courage, I just miss Mae Mobley. Oh, from her childhood experiences with Abele, and then growing to the point where she showed this amazing courage when her father said, "Who taught you the Rosa Parks game, the back of the bus game?"
The Martin Luther King game.
Right. And she protected Abele and lied about it. Oh, that was just beautiful. So she was one of my favorite characters.
I liked Abele and also Minnie because I saw a bit of my mother in both the ladies.
Okay.
My mother was a black maid in North Carolina with several white families. And the last family she worked for, they had 3 children, and one of the children was what you would call today mentally challenged, and my mother helped him a lot. He called her Christmas and told her how, much the family loved her. So those are...
All right, last, Clarissa?
I loved all the characters. I identified somewhat with Skeeter. She was liberated through other stories. And it's interesting how you can hear other ladies' stories, even on the book club. This Women of Wisdom. And I just love how she found herself. And even the courage to go to New York was a conversation with Abele. And similar to Celia, when she was somewhat hypocritical when Minnie was telling her, why don't you talk to Skeeter? Oh, well, they don't deal with Skeeter anymore. And so Minnie looked at her with a different look of,
out of everything, I didn't think you would be a hypocrite. And that's when she started looking at the situation different, and her liberation took over. So it was just a story of liberation to me.
Yeah, and I wish the story had been written during the 60s so that readers could have taken a look at Miss Hilly, because I think she represents that conundrum. On the one hand, you can clean my house, I trust you there when I'm not home, you take care of my children, but I believe in the black stereotype and separate but equal. Unequal. And I think Miss Hilly represents that, this oppositional view that the South had to being segregated. And she's all of that and much more. What would have happened had the book been written in the 60s when people could have read her character and perhaps come away looking at integration and segregation a lot differently.
And speaking of that, Mamie, we have one of the actors, I believe, who can step to the mic in just a moment and then read the sanitation rule or the initiative that Miss Healy, who you're talking about, had come up with. And realizing that in the book, The Help, these women had a lot of rules.
That's true.
They had the husband hunting rule, they had the Jim Crow laws, they had dating rules, clothing rules, rules for how you wear your hair, rules for working for the white folks. It's just a whole lot of rules. I believe we have our dramatic actor set up now, and she's going to go ahead and share some of the attitudes and the thought process of a segregated Mississippi through the eyes of Miss Healy.
That night I work on the newsletter wishing I was working on the stories instead. I go through the notes in the last league meeting and come across Hilly's envelope. I open it. It is one page written in Hilly's fat, curly pen. Hilly Halbrook introduces the Home Health Sanitation Initiative, a disease preventative measure, low-cost bathroom installation in your garage or shed for homes without such an important fixture. Ladies, did you know that 99% of all colored diseases are carried in the urine? Whites can become permanently disabled by nearly all of these diseases because we lack immunity coloreds carry in their darker pigmentation. Some germs carried by whites can also be harmful to coloreds too. Protect yourself, protect your children, protect your health. From the Halbrooks, we say, you're welcome.
Doesn't just hearing that just kind of make you crinkle up in here like this and just make you kind of wonder, you know, the ignorance that whatever this was that was going on there. Patricia, tell us what you think about this.
I did not understand how someone as bright as Skeeter, with her sensibilities, could have a friend like Miss Hilly.
I gotcha. But we know how Miss Skeeter fixed all that.
Yeah, I know. It just doesn't seem true to me that so much time could go on and she would claim Miss Hilly as her best friend and only discover that later on. But that would be one of my few quibbles with the book.
We know that later on in the book, Skeeter was supposed to put that in the newsletter, and she ended up, she said it was a typo, but it ended up that she had people delivering toilets to Healy's house instead of, you know, putting these toilets in their home. So, you know, you got to read the book because then you get to put all of this together. It was a very, very, very good book. We got to move right along here because we've got some audience members here who have questions and comments. We want to go ahead and entertain that too. But for right now, just a few more questions for our panelists and how you all felt about reading this with your group discussion with Readers Writers Inc. And that was, how do you see the attitude of racial segregation going on to the next generation in this book? You talk about Mae Mobley. How do we see, do we think that in all of this that Mae Mobley may be able to break the boundaries that we're talking about with racial segregation back in the 60s? I mean, she was 2 when she was first introduced in the book, but I think she was 4 and getting up by the time she started realizing, or at least playing some of these games that many had played with her, i.e. Martin Luther King. And she told Mae Mobley that the reason why they didn't like him was because he was green, because he was a Martian. So, you know, what do we think about Mae Mobley? Do you think that the next generation Mississippi at that point was going to be more like the Skeeters, or were they going to be more like the Healy's?
It's like the setting in Your Blues Ain't Like Mine by B.B. Moore Campbell takes place in Hopewell, Mississippi. I think there's hope through Mae Mobley. Not only that, I think there's also hope for these maids, to coin a phrase, generational domesticity. I don't think that's going to exist. We hear the testimonies of a couple of the maids saying, well, my mother was a maid, my grandmother was a maid, but I think at this point it's going to stop. We see that Abele, who has no, her one son died, so she has no other children, right? Right, so she's not going to pass on this generational kind of maiddom, again, to create a word, and I don't think the other women are either. So there seems to be hope that Catherine Stockett is introducing us to on both sides.
Any other comments? Go ahead, Patricia.
Minnie was preparing one of her daughters to continue, at least in her absence, while Minnie had her baby. But that daughter was very angry, and it would be a difficult situation for her. She wouldn't be accepting that.
Now, this book had a lot of lies. Everybody was telling, it seems like every character was lying in here, and every character had a secret, and every character had some sort of deceit going on with something. Or it seemed to work to some degree, to where you can get the idea of what Catherine Stockett was doing as she painted each of these people with her descriptive words, but then all of them seemed to have some of the same thing going on with them. They were different, but yet the same. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that probably is human nature, that no matter how different we are or appear to be on the surface, at the core we are all almost identical, except these surface features like skin color and hair texture and all of that. I think it's human to lie and to do all these things, and that's what was going on in the book. Back to the thing about whether the generations, there will be generational change. I think that if you're talking about in the book, perhaps, but I think in the real world there was some changes that many young black folk went forward into the world and became things other than maids. But then even today in the world we live in, there are quite a few, a large portion of the black experiences lived in sort of low-income jobs where the same sort of thing goes on.
Okay, and I think a lot of people who probably read this book might say this to some degree. Some of the things that you saw here, would you say that some of those things still go on now, to some degree?
Yes.
I mean, you basically have said that, Aura, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. Do any of the other panelists agree, or do you?
Absolutely.
I see you, Jeanette, shaking your head.
Yes, and just to very quickly share an experience, I have a daughter who she's 40 now, but she recalled when I was talking to her about the book today that she had an aunt, a great aunt, and she was visiting with her, and the aunt was a maid and had been, but she happened to be a Minnie type. She was very feisty and spoke up and so forth, and everybody respected her because she would speak up. But her employer happened to stop by, and she immediately changed roles. There's a passive aggressiveness that goes on frequently as a survival technique, I think. And I think that's what happened. My daughter was she was only 13 at the time. My daughter was very upset that she had seen this transition in her great aunt from the feisty lady that she loved to this obsequious person that was talking to her employer.
Okay.
But you know, I also think the seeds are planted just as Abele planted seeds in Mae Mobley. Constantine planted those seeds in Skeeter. Skeeter's mind frame does not come from her mother. It comes from their help, Constantine. And you know this because through the book, she's trying to find out, well, what happened to Constantine when I went off to school? And I actually kept reading because I wanted to know what happened to Constantine.
Yeah, because she seemed to be a really great
Exactly.
help a person to be working there is the maid. Yeah.
So it's about the seeds we plant. So the seeds are planted, and each generation there's more seeds, so we continue to evolve. So yes, some of the things are still going on today, but we're still continuing to evolve. So there has to be that hope.
Yeah, some people are planting positive seeds and others are planting negative ones, so it's still out there, I think.
Okay.
The role of the book is very important because the writing of their experiences also gives them power through the spoken word as well. And they find themselves through that writing experience. And they pursue it despite the problems that they might suffer as a result. And each one comes through that experience empowered and going in new directions.
I see. We have a member of our audience standing at the podium. He's been there for just a few minutes patiently. We're going to just come to you. Please give us your name and go ahead with your comment.
Hi, I'm Victor Vath. My question actually was, we heard a little bit about multiple members in an African American family having to work to keep food on the table and clothes on backs in the reading. And I was thinking, comparing it to A Raisin in the Sun, how multiple members of the family had to work to get one of the family members through higher education. What kind of work, how much work would it take just for those simple things of keeping a family fed, you know, so that everyone has clothes, everyone has shoes? I mean, would there be any help who would live in with the family that they had, that sort of thing?
Wow, there's a story in the book where, is it twins that are going off to school?
That's right.
And the maid
Abele
actually
Mae.
gets arrested because she's $30 short.
Right.
But because of that situation, the church, the maids, they make that money up so both of her children can go off to school because she wanted to send her children to higher education. And so she was working for that. And it was about that time for them to go off to school, and she was about, I want to say it was $30 short for both the kids because they were twins. And so she steals ruby earrings that she's going to replace back. But she's
They're
just
not even rubies.
Yeah,
they're
they're not
supposedly
really-
fake. Skeeter
right,
tells us that they're
right,
fake.
right.
And she steals them from I believe, Healy.
Yeah, that's
Yes,
right. I think
yes,
so.
yes. So
Of all people to steal from in the
Oh,
book,
my
don't
goodness.
steal from Healy,
My
because what,
goodness.
in essence, as you're just saying, Clarissa, what we find out is Abele Mae ends up spending 4 years of her life in the penitentiary for basically petty theft.
exactly.
And it's at the hands of Healy, who made sure that the judge handed that sentence when she was found guilty. So, you know, this is some of that reason why we'll find that some of the maids who wouldn't talk before because there was just too much risk involved in Mississippi at this time. So they wouldn't want to talk until now. It's like now they're going to have a voice. They're going to be able to come out and speak out about the ills that they see going on in the city where they live, and they're right there in their own parish.
And
Thank you
that's
so
a really
much.
thoughtful question, too, especially comparing the novel to A Raisin in the Sun. The same dynamics are going on here. And in the African American community, a way out of poverty, it was always thought, or is still that way in many African American communities, is to get an education. Because in A Raisin in the Sun, remember, they were trying to educate the daughter, whose name I can't remember right now. And we have that in this book. They're trying to get out of being maids so that they can have a better life. And also, you know, I thought about my own father and my mother. My mother was a maid, and my father was a civil service worker. As the expression goes, we was po, and I didn't know it.
Yeah.
Because
That was-
they were
that was
working
a very
hard
popular
to
phrase
get me,
back then.
right. They're trying hard to get
Okay.
us through school, but I
Okay.
had no idea we were actually poor.
Okay. All right. We have another studio audience member who stepped up to the podium. Give us your name.
My name is Joe Edmiston. I'm proud to be the husband of Patricia. And my question has to do with men. The men are underrepresented here tonight, and they were underrepresented in the book. I'd like to get some comments about Skeeter's boyfriend, Skeeter's father, and the husband of that woman that hired the maid secretly.
Just come on up here and get on the set, Mr. Johnny. I think it was Mr. Johnny. Thank you so much for that.
That's a good question.
All right, let's talk about some of the men in the book, just like he said. We know that Mr. Johnny, as he mentioned, was kind of beholding to Minnie because he realized that she had ultimately saved his wife's life, because we know that she had a miscarriage and she could have bled to death. But Minnie was there and she was able to call the doctor and get help. So Minnie didn't have to worry about her job like some of the other maids would to have to worry about later on in the story. So Mr. Johnny was beholding in that way for that. Let's talk about some of the other men.
Some of these men, I think, are responsible for one of the other themes, place, keeping women in their place. It's not just the maids, but the white women in their place. That's how I see a couple of them. Mr. Johnny was, of course, one of my favorite characters because he brought, I thought, some comic relief to the text. But other than that, I think most of the men that we saw were very much in control, in charge, and
especially so with Stewart.
Right.
Skeeter's kind of love interest in all of this. And Stewart was the son of the senator, and we see that he's kind of going back and forth because he was once in love with this girl who apparently broke his heart, and now he's kind of, I don't know what he was doing with Skeeter, because he was kind of in and out of Skeeter's life. Well, how do you think Skeeter should have dealt with that, and what do you think of Stewart, as our studio audience member just asked about some of the men in the book?
I love the dad. I love the senator. I love how he was actually, since he was home, and he says in the book, 9 to 5, I have to control my tongue in my house. I don't want to have to do that. So he was speaking his mind and speaking his views, which was not unlike Skeeter's to some degree, if you listen to what he's saying. So the senator was someone.
Stewart, I don't know. Her love interest seemed a little weak to me. I don't know. Was it just me? He just seemed like he was very, very weak.
And then he appeared to be getting stronger, but then he was a big disappointment.
He was a victim of all the conditioning as well.
Reading the story, I was impressed with how Johnny reacted when he found out that Celia had hired Minnie. She was very frightened, but you know, he was
okay with it.
He was okay. Yes, he was.
You'd probably be okay too. Somebody's cooking and cleaning and taking care of your wife.
He knew it all along anyway. He said
I know she's not cooking his food.
I loved him for loving Celia.
Okay, I did too.
And seeing through all the pink frilly sequin dresses and the bleached hair and the overly made-up face, he saw through all of that.
And she thought that he was really marrying her because they thought she was pregnant. And she finds out later that that's not why, because she ended up having like 4 miscarriages in there.
And he stood up for her when those other guys were just looking at her bosoms.
And he stood by her side even though he found out she wasn't pregnant. I mean, he's still dedicated and loving, and you do see that through the story, that he truly, truly loves Celia. We talk about Skeeter a lot because Skeeter is, of course, one of the 3 main characters. The first 2, Minnie and Abele, being black maids, and Skeeter being the white lady who comes into this and actually creates the help, because she's able to pull these maids together and slowly but surely begin to get them to talk to her and tell her their experiences of what it's like to be the help. Do you think Skeeter was self-serving? Because all along, she said she wanted to be a journalist. And she found out with her New York her potential employer, that if she could write a book of this sort, she might be one step closer to realizing, you know, her passion of journalism in New York. Do you think she was self-serving in writing this book? Because it put all of them at risk. Yes, they were all at risk talking about these white women that they worked for. Back in the 60s.
She had to do the same thing they did. They crossed physical boundaries, the maids, to work in these white homes. She had to cross these physical boundaries to go into these black neighborhoods, and often putting herself in jeopardy. The jury is still out on that. I thought about that all through the reading of the book and listening to it on tape as well. What is she doing? Is this self-serving for her to get her some fame? And I don't know. I'd like to hear some other thoughts on that.
I don't think she was at all.
Okay.
I mean, to the degree that we all act upon our conscience, if we can say that that's self-serving or selfish, she, I think, was acting upon her conscience. It doesn't seem to me that it was just to get a job. Maybe it was the hook, but she went too far with this, and I think she really cared deeply about the women was very worried about their well-being.
Because we heard, as one of our dramatic actors talked about, rural Mississippi and the attitudes of the white women who would not do what the men would do. They wouldn't come burn your houses down and kill you and shoot you. These white women would do it another way with their little sharp tools. You know, they had a way of just kind of slowly but surely destroying you. First firing you, and then kind of like becoming a cancer in your life, not letting go. So I guess what I'm coming to with this now is how Minnie responded in her anger toward Miss Healy, and the fact that, if you notice in the book, Miss Healy was like the antagonizer, I think, in a lot of ways. She kept the stuff stirred. She kept things going and that sort of thing. So when we think about what Minnie did to the pie for Miss Healy, she did a little something to the pie. Yeah, okay.
That's what kept us reading the book, to find out.
And it was nothing nice, let me tell
here?
you. But what do you think about what she did? I mean, is that the way to get back at somebody who's doing these, coming up with these ignorant ways of segregation? Of course, this is racism back then. This is what this was in the 60s, segregation and that sort of thing. But was Minnie at all, do you think she was justified putting whatever she put in the pie? We know what
Although I don't know if she necessarily was justified,
Okay.
but I will say this, it was the insurance that later was needed to protect the women, to protect the health. So it may not have been, but when you come down to, does the end justify the means, it was the insurance.
I don't know. Or
Read the book.
what did Minnie put in the pie?
Do you want me to say the real word? Or
No, girl, PBS. Now, some people.
I don't know. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, but human nature again. Personally, I could never do anything like that. No matter what anybody had done to me, it would never occur to me to do that. But there are people who would, and I've known some people who have done similar sorts of things.
It is implied that she put some of her poop in the pie, making the chocolate custard pie a chocolate custard poop pie, I guess. Compliments of Minnie. And we know that Healy, in the book, eats 2 slices, 2 big, healthy slices of this. But I know, Patricia, you and I talked in the green room shortly before the program began this evening. You had a sort of different take on whether or not that was really done.
I did, but I think the panels nearly convinced me that she put at least a little bit in.
You didn't think she'd done that, really?
No, because I thought that she was fooling with Hilly's mind, and you know, letting her think that something was in there. The recipe was given, the Mexican vanilla, the baker's chocolate, and so I thought, well.
But then at the very end, she says, and then I went on and told her what else I put in the pie. And that's when things went awry.
And I think using the term, the terrible awful, she was always so afraid of the terrible awful. So I would guess.
She ended up being fired, of course, by Miss
But I
Taylor.
was enlightened because they said it would have just been a little bit.
Okay.
And I think
it would have been a sinker.
I think Stockett gives her justification throughout the pages of the book, describing the antics of Miss Hilly.
But you know, I think, if I can talk about that character and how it was drawn, she had no redeeming qualities. And ordinarily in a character, you will give her something, except that she was Skeeter's friend in the beginning. But everything about Miss Hilly is irritating and selfish and, you know.
Definitely so. We have another gentleman who stepped up to our phone. Where are the women in the audience tonight? We have the women on the set here, and then we have the men in the audience going to the podium. I love it a lot. Go ahead, give us your name.
My name is Jenna Leroy, and it sounded like to me even Minnie thought it was terrible awful because she kept saying that through the book.
did.
She probably, At any rate, something that's occurred to me to wonder is when the book Help came out in Jackson, Mississippi in the book, it raised quite a furor. And what I've been wondering is, that there must be still a junior league in Jackson, Mississippi. And my guess is that the people that run that junior league, it was probably their mothers that were the models for these characters. So I just wonder how you think that the help is going down in Jackson, Mississippi today.
Wow. That's really a good question.
Wow.
Yeah, because as you mentioned, Minnie was able to use the awful, the terrible awful, to protect the other maids from any retribution that they might have for participating and helping to write the book and giving their side of how they view working for these women, these white women in Mississippi. So that's a very good question. What do we think?
I'm going to make another reference to another piece of literature.
Okay.
Ntozake Shange, when she wrote For Colored Girls, was asked by critics and a large number of people in the black community, why did you have to tell about Bo Willie Brown? Bo Willie Brown, if you've read the play or if you've seen the movie, ends up killing his children. She said, because it's the truth. I know Bo Willie Brown. I met Bo Willie Brown in my community, so the truth needs to be told. And so perhaps this is the case with Catherine Stockett, just telling the truth, and perhaps a large number of readers in that community might recognize some of the people, some of the antics, some of the actions. This is the truth. This is what happened in Jackson, Mississippi in the 60s, to the maids, to the help and the helped.
Okay. Anybody else have a comment?
I think it's interesting, the point you make is really interesting because the league, there are two leagues, the Junior League and the League of Women Voters, I mean, that we know about. And clearly she didn't mean the League of Women Voters.
Clearly.
And so, yeah.
Okay.
I would guess there was a strong reference.
Yeah, it really was. How do we feel at this point? We've talked about some of the characters in the book, and we're talking about how this resonates with us. What do you think Catherine Stockett, at the end of her book, she's the author, of course, she talks about her own experience with the maids, or her maid, Dimitri. And she also goes on at the end, very end, in her kind of her acknowledgments, she talks about, you know, Mississippi then, and says that she can talk about Mississippi, but nobody else can talk about Mississippi, her home. How much of this did you get the impression, as I read this all the way to the end, that Catherine Stockett was Skeeter?
I thought about that.
Did you not?
I did.
She didn't say it. I felt like at the very end of the book, she was still changing names. Dimitri for Constantine. She changed her name. She's in New York now. I mean, I just kind of felt like maybe it's supposed to be fiction, but I just kind of felt like maybe, I don't know, yeah.
It's an autobiographical novel, I'll bet.
Okay.
Me too. I agree. And speaking of names, I think I asked you, did you notice that the maids don't have last names?
The only one who had one was Constantine Bates.
Okay.
She did, and she was Skeeter's.
Right.
She looked
So that's another way of objectifying them, and that's not necessarily a bad tool. That may may have been intentional on Stockett's part to make the novel more realistic, because I would imagine a number of maids probably were identified only by their first names, and the people for whom they worked might not have even known their last names.
This is true.
Yeah.
We have another studio audience member who stepped up to the podium. We want to get straight to you. Give us your name.
Hi, my name is Deb Richmond, and I do want you maybe to expand on your opinions of, as Mamie called them, the helped. When you were talking about Hilly and you said she had no redeeming qualities, but in the book she's a wonderful mother, and that might be her only redeeming quality. And as you were saying, the characters all had something they were hiding, and I think maybe they had these facades of the roles they were expected to fulfill. And Miss Lee Foote, I had no sympathy for her, but I felt like she was probably the most miserable person, because she was miserable with her life, and she was doing what she was expected to do, but she wasn't happy with that. So if you could maybe talk about those people.
You want to talk about that? Anybody?
Well, getting back to Miss Hilly, she reminded me of an arch stereotype, a caricature with so many negative traits, and yes, a good mother. And Miss Lee Foote, weak, perhaps desperate for the approval of other people. And this, of course, was a setup for Catherine Stockett to show the redeeming or the positive traits of these courageous black women. And to do that, you need to compare and contrast. And she did that beautifully.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Did I dream this when I was trying to think of something to write about? I was writing an article about the help. Or is there something in the text where someone says Miss Hilly is most represented by a microphone, and that Miss Leafolk is most represented by a sewing machine, and Miss Celia Foote, I don't remember what, but there was an assignment of a symbol. And I think those may well be their redeeming qualities, that they did have something to offer.
Okay, very good. Okay, thank you. I guess you almost don't want to give the end away, but then you do, because you're watching and you probably want to know what happens to these people. We know in the end, I guess we should tell, maybe.
I think it sounds as if most people here have read the book, or would be willing to read the book anyway.
We find that in the end, Minnie says she's, in a lot of ways, a lot of these people begin to see that they're free.
Yeah.
Minnie, Abeline, and even Skeeter. Because Skeeter finally ends up going off to college. Minnie ends up having to run from Leroy, who's been her abusive husband. And it's like she finally realized, after this thing came down, as we talked about some of the attitudes of how the white women would get after you, after Minnie had lost her, basically wasn't gonna lose her job, but Leroy had lost her job because of this thing that happens. He was upset with her, no doubt, and beat her up. And then this was like the break point for her. She was able to get away. So she was free from him, you know.
And Celia was free from those society women.
That's right. And then lastly, Abeline, who ended up being fired by Miss Foote, who we were just talking about how we thought sadly of her, she's free because even though she's fired, she's able to go on with her life. That was her last baby, 17 children that she was able to find. And she says this about being free at the end. She says, "I'm free like many, freer than Miss Leafolk, who's so locked up in her own head and don't even recognize herself when she read it. And freer than Miss Hilly. That woman gonna spend the rest of her life trying to convince people she didn't eat that pie." And I think about you, May, sitting in jail, cause Miss Hilly, she in her own jail, but with a lifelong term. That's kind of deep. That kind of just put it all out there for the other characters, other than just the main characters. We have another audience member who's at the podium. Want to get to your question? Give us your name first.
All right. Hi, I'm Helen Wiggersma, and I love the book. I thought it was extremely well written, but I have a couple of, I have a whole bunch of questions, but I'll restrict it to one.
Okay, and we only have a few minutes.
That
so.
Miss Skeeter, as you read the novel, did you feel that she was an exploiter of Abeline or an enabler for Abeline? Because I had very mixed emotions as I began to read the book and then as I ended the book, and I'm curious as to your reaction.
Wow, I think they were both doing the same to each other. Didn't you? What, any of you?
Abeline or an enabler? I've been talking a lot.
An enabler for Abeline to become free of the family and to rely on her writing.
An enabler perhaps for her to, for all of the women to be able to step forward and speak up for themselves, perhaps, not just Abeline.
I would go with that.
I would say
not
more
an
a
exploiter.
No. I believe the book was about self-discovery. I think each character relied on each other to some extent, discovering who they really were, which is part of Miss Leafolk's issue. She really had no idea who she was, so she was about pleasing other people because she had no identity. Besides the sewing, you're right. I mean, she was a great seamstress, it appears. So I think it was just a liberation. I think there was freedom throughout the themes of the book, which is the problem I had with Stuart. Because he wasn't free. He was very weak. He had no idea who he was. And he was in contrast to his dad, who I felt like had somewhat of a freedom. He understood what he needed to do. So, no.
Let's see, Miss Skeeter, chapter 8. I think she says here, I was raised by a colored woman. I've seen how simple it can be and how complex it can be between the families and the help. I'd like to write this book showing the point of view of the help, the colored women down here. I tried to picture Constantine's face. They raise a white child, and then 20 years later, the child becomes the employer. It's that irony that we love them and they love us. So I think she is trying to enable Abele and the others to have this vision, the same vision that she has. This is what she's trying to do. She's not exploiting. Earlier I said the jury was still out.
Okay.
So I was reminded of this quote. And yes.
Kind of tipped the scale for
Yes.
you. All right. And also Skeeter went on to say,
Right.
adding to that, she said, they say it's like true love, good help. You only get one in a lifetime.
Okay.
And so I don't know. Skeeter's like, in some regards, she's painted as a frail person, but in the end, she's just really a strong person because, as we say, she put her life at risk to make this happen. And as we know, these women were able to benefit. The book did very well. People bought a lot of these books, and so they began to get some of the proceeds from it, and they all began to be liberated in their own ways.
In a sense, what happened in the book is also happening in the real world right now.
Okay.
You know, it's a story within a story.
I think we can all, as I mentioned earlier, I think everybody can find somebody, if not themselves, at some point in here with some type of attitude, some stereotypical thing that you've had to deal with. It's all there. And Catherine Stockett did an excellent job, I think, of pulling all that together.
She did.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm glad you all chose this book, and I'm glad you all allowed Aware to bring you on our set and you here in order to do this book TV program so that people can pick up the help for themselves and read it and see what's inside here for them. And again, this is going to be a motion picture very soon. So we want to take the time now to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank my studio guests here and you out there for this very lively discussion on this book, which can be about life's lessons, inspiring, engaging, entertaining, and educational. And it can also take us where we have never gone before. The Help is a timeless, universal story about the lines that we abide by and the ones that we don't. I want you to check out The Help, and when it comes out to the movie theaters near you, you want to check it out there too. Until the next time, I'm Dee Dee Sharp saying stay informed and stay aware.